Well, it is fall. I'm back from sabbatical. We're back into a book of the Bible, so I thought I would also bring back sermon scraps. So we started this week in 1 Timothy chapter 3, really starting to dig into the meat of the book. And Paul begins by urging Timothy to instruct certain people not to teach false doctrine, which led us down this path of exploring some of Paul's other letters to see exactly what it was he was referring to. So the things that Paul specifically references here are myths, endless genealogies, which lead to empty speculations and fruitless discussions. Now, there's always things on Sundays that I just don't have time to do because there's so much to cover in any one of these texts. Like, honestly, you could probably do an entire 35 to 40 minute sermon on every single one of these verses. There's just so much in them that you need to define and dig into. So I wanted to share just a little bit more about each one of these things that Paul's talking about and some potentials for us today to think about and consider. So when Paul talks about myths, most likely he would be referring to something like Greek mythology. And Greek mythology is just an attempt to explain why the world is the way it is. Like, you have all these different deities that are vying for power, for attention, for prestige. That's why you have weather events. That's why you have the ocean acting the way it is. But they weren't the only ones that tried to come up with ideas or postulations or theories about why the world that we see operates the way it does. Think of like a Darwinian evolution, divorced from any of God's influence. That's another attempt to try to explain why the world is the way it is. Another one that I've been reading and hearing more about is multiverse theory. Multiverse theory isn't something that Marvel came up with. It's actually a postulation that there is some being or entity or machine that just continues churning out universes one after another, like more than we can ever possibly keep track of or count. And out of all of those universes that have been created, we just happen to be in this one that allowed for human life to flourish. Now, the question for us in a lot of these myth ideas is everyone believes in some kind of miracle. Which miracle do you want to believe in? Do you want to believe that the universe that we live in, that everything that exists came out of nothing? Or do you want to believe in the miracle that Jesus rose from the dead? That's really the reality at the core of this myth conversation. The second thing he talks about is endless genealogies. And in the first century, that would have been primarily aimed at the Jewish leaders who were trying to trace and track down all of the lineage back to Father Abraham. But we do similar things today, I think. Like, we use credentials. Like, what's your background? What's your experience? What school did you attend? Or how many degrees do you have? All these things that are not helpful for actually following and chasing after Jesus. Like, some of the best, most educated people in the world are avowed atheists. You can also say the reverse, though. Like, some of the most intelligent and educated people are also faithful followers of Jesus. So at the end of the day, genealogies is not a helpful barometer about whether or not someone is actually pursuing faithful teaching. And then he ends kind of summarizing empty speculations and fruitless discussions. I brought up one side on Sunday that I see people have a tendency to just fixate on the end. And friends, every single generation of Christians have thought they were living in the very end, that their generation was going to be the one that would see Jesus returning. Like, there's even entire, I'll put them in scare quotes, ministries that try to predict and then stir up discord and division by just fixating narrowly on these things. So friends, please do not become captivated by them. Like, we see this anytime there's this blood moon reality where the moon becomes red. I even saw people making predictions based on a solar eclipse that was going to pass through towns in the United States that they claimed were named after cities in the Bible. That's a profound misunderstanding of how the Bible works, of how prophecy works, and it's a major problem because it overinflates the significance of the United States of America. But what's fascinating to me is the end tends to bring about a lot of empty speculation, fruitless discussion, but so does the beginning. Because we could say the exact same issue about creation. And the question, how long did God take to create everything? And if we just say it either has to be only an old earth or it has to be only a young earth, we are lopping off a significant portion of faithful followers of Jesus. Charles Spurgeon, actually, like, he's known as the Prince of Christian orthodoxy. Sorry, this video might be a little sketchy, but this is my third time trying to record this, so I'm just going to push through here. Charles Spurgeon actually said this about creation. He said, "We do not know how remote the period of the creation of this globe may be. Certainly, many millions of years before the time of Adam. Our planet has passed through various stages of existence, and different kinds of creatures have lived on its surface, all of which have been fashioned by God. Spurgeon himself didn't have any issues holding to an old earth interpretation of Genesis. That's not dismissing of Scripture. That's not belittling of Scripture. In fact, one of the things I recently learned is in the 50s, Moody Publishing, was Moody in Chicago, actually refused to publish a book that was advocating for young earth creationism because it was viewed as that divisive of an issue and not something that all Christians must hold to. It's just fascinating to me if you trace some of the history on some of these empty speculations and fruitless discussions. The reality is, like, these things matter. But we need to do some theological triage in what significance we give various portions of how we talk about this. God created the world, bar none. Like, that is essential. As far as how long he took in his creation of that, it doesn't really have any significant bearing on our hermeneutics, our interpretation of Scripture, or the way that we are commanded to live our lives today. Another thing connected to this, like, so I've been pushing that this idea of household permeates Paul's thinking here. So one of the verses that we just talked about in verse 4, these promote empty speculations rather than God's plan, which operates by faith. The word Paul uses there for plan is actually a Greek word that is primarily used for household administration, for like proper ordering of how the household is supposed to function. So I just continue putting before you what Paul is wanting us to do is have proper ordering of God's household here in the church. Paul then goes on to talk about the law and the proper use of the law, which I think actually is summarized really well by Paul in Romans 3:20. He says, "For no one will be justified in God's sight by the works of the law, because the knowledge of sin comes through the law." What I talked about on Sunday, where it provides these boundaries, these markers of how to remain in the law or remain following after God. And because of what Jesus has done, because Jesus came, it actually allows forgiveness for those who have broken, who have transgressed, who have jumped over those good boundaries that God gives to us. And then Paul also talks about the patience of the Lord. I just want to remind us and encourage us. Like, I've heard from a few people in our church recently over the past few weeks that have friends or family members or children who have kind of spent a season really walking away from the Lord, who are suddenly showing interest, like talking to someone whose child, after claiming to be an atheist, is now suddenly reading the Bible again, and having some of these conversations, listening to sermons again, going to church this past week. Someone else told me about this. And so there's something unique happening right now. And so as we see, like, Paul talk about the patience of the Lord, remember, as long as someone is here living and breathing, continue praying. There's something unique that is happening here in our world right now. So continue looking for opportunities to share the gospel, continue looking for opportunities to point people to Jesus, and continue looking for ways to help people understand the realities that God is patient, but patient up to a point. Lastly, there are two names that are mentioned here at the end of the book, and I'm not sure if it's the same people, which is why I didn't say this on Sunday, so I'm just going to share it here because they may not be referring to the same things, but it's the same names. So there's two people mentioned at the end, Hymenaeus and Alexander, who Paul says have shipwrecked their faith. So Hymenaeus is actually mentioned again in 2 Timothy 2, where there Paul says, "Avoid irreverent and empty speech, since those who engage in it will produce even more godlessness, and their teaching will spread like gangrene. Hymenaeus and Philetus are among them. They have departed from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already taken place and are ruining the faith of some." So many scholars think that person is the same Hymenaeus that he's referring to here in 1 Timothy, which tells us what Hymenaeus is doing here is he's telling people that the resurrection has already taken place, and it hasn't. Like, Jesus hasn't returned back to the earth. Second one would be Alexander. And this one, there's more debate about it because Alexander is a more common name in the first century. But in 2 Timothy 4, he says, "Alexander the coppersmith did great harm to me. The Lord will repay him according to his works. Watch out for him yourself, because he strongly opposed our words." So apparently, what many scholars, if these are the same people, what was happening is Hymenaeus and Alexander were continually looking to continue sowing up discord and division in the church, which is where you see something in Titus where Paul says, "Warn them once, warn them twice, and then have nothing to do with them." Like, false teaching has great impact and influence in the church, so we need to guard ourselves carefully against it. All right, that's my thoughts on this one. Coming up this next week, we'll be in 1 Timothy chapter 2, which will be actually looking at Christian political engagement. So I'd ask you, if you're watching this, please take some time to pray for me this week as I think and pray and ponder over what it is the Lord wants to share for us from 1 Timothy chapter 2 this week. May the Lord bless you this week, and Lord willing, we'll see you Sunday morning.